The wedding has been quite too quiet for a mafia hire, like no grand celebration, no dance, just silence, hope sealed under tense eyes. You stood in a pale irony gown while he, not even a kiss. You been in his mansion for 2 weeks now. 2 weeks of waking up alone. 2 weeks of meal eating in silence. 2 weeks of watching the man who was now your husband vanish into his office. You had been expecting this had to prepare yourself mentally. The moment your father announced the alliances, I will protect our family, he had said. He doesn't want your sister anymore. He chose you. Every time you crossed paths with him, you saw it. That flicker of indifference, the way he bravely acknowledged you like you wasn't his wife, but a stranger passing through. You were seated at the long dining table tonight, pushing your food around when you finally gathered the courage. Your voice was soft, carefully. Across from you. Did you want this marriage? You asked, forcing the question that has been eating you alive, or was it something you were forced into? His face didn't change. He placed his glass down, his tone. His gaze mature and readable. I choose you, he said simply, but there was no affection in the word. No warmth. You shadowed the Aki and nodded, pretending it was enough. That night you walked past his office and saw the door silently ajar. You paused. Inside, he stood at his bookshelf, his back to you. His jacket was off sleeve, rolled up, revealing veins that fixtured at. He reached for something on the top shelf. You were about to leave when you heard the soft hustle of paper. He pulled down a photo frame and stared it longer than he should have. You stepped back, hidden by the hallway, shadow heart racing. When he turned toward the light, you catch a glimpse. It was her, Yura, your older sister. Her smiling face frozen in the photograph from a year ago, standing next to him back when they heard humor about him close. You felt the door vanish within you. So that's why he never looked at you. That's why he kept his distance. You were second choice. And that night, when you slip into your empty bed, you didn't cry. You just stopped expecting anything from the man who wore your ring because your heart was finally ringing. He may have married you, but never stopped her loving her. Time skipped. You were in the garden that night, watering the lilies, and Maid said your mother used to love the sun was soft, silently heavy until a black car pulled up at the gate. You wasn't expecting anyone, neither was the staff. The driver stepped out of opened the black door, and your heart pretended the red hills touched the stone path. That voice, that smile. Yura stood before you in a tight morning dress, sunglasses stopped at her head, her designer luggage wheel behind her like she hadn't disappeared. You are back, you asked softly, trying to keep the storm from raising your voice. I miss the house, she whispered casually, letting her son. If she owned every hall, didn't expect the guest room to be taken though, or master bedroom. She turned to raise brow, saw him. She asked, you really married him? You didn't answer, you didn't have to. That night, Tim came home late as usual. His step were quite composed, but he froze when he saw Yura seated in living room sipping wine like the place was her again. Yura, his voice was calm, but his jaw tense silently. What are you doing here? She smiled brightly. Visiting my sister and her new husband. Tonight it have dropped by. Congrats to the couple. You stood behind the pillar watching the scene unfold. your heart trying to read him. He didn't smile, he turned to you instead. You okay, your breath aged. You nodded. Why go rest? I will talk to her. But you couldn't stop the freaking of the doubt as you walked away, because when you turned, you saw her touch his arm, but he didn't pull away fast enough. That night, things began to shift painfully. Yura followed him around like a shadow. She started preparing during breakfast, commenting on his old friends. You kept quiet, folding your hand tighter each day. One evening, while you were walking past any hall, laughter and her. I still remember when you got drunk at the rooftop party. You were giggled. You pushed me off the couch, he said, almost as you felt like a dagger. This was a story you had never heard, but she had. Next day, she catch you alone in the corridor. You know, she said casually, Appa wanted him to marry me first. I had a real connection back then. You did speak. I guess he'd settle for you when I left. That night you stood by the window of your bedroom, watching the stars through blurry eyes. You wanted to believe in he had chosen you. You wanted to believe those quiet moments. The time he placed his jacket over you when you fall asleep in the study. The way he always made sure the staff left your favorite tea on the tray meant something, but now you wasn't sure if fear, kindness or guilt. So once again you told yourself, stop expecting anything. He didn't want you. You wanted her.